So we're now recording. Okay, ready?
hmm
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the third episode of the Healing Haven podcast. Today we are talking all things neurodivergence with Lexus Garcia. Lexus, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. I want to read Lexus's bio and then we are diving right in. Lexus Garcia is a licensed clinical social worker certified as an EMDR therapist, as well as a trauma-conscious yoga therapist. She earned her master's of social work from University of Arkansas. Lexus has experience working with adolescents and adults who struggle with trauma, chronic illness, and autism. Lexus integrates dialectical behavior therapy, also known as DBT, motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT, and holistic healing in her practice. Lexus focuses on exploring all parts of the self as well as the systems that we are a part of. Lexus's practice is completely non-judgmental, encouraging clients to focus on their inner strength and resiliency. While providing a safe space for individuals to express themselves, she works to assist individuals in healing and building on their strengths. In her free time, Lexus loves to read, play video games, participate in yoga, and watch the Chicago Cubs. She also enjoys spending time traveling and gardening. Lexus, thank you for being here. Our audience doesn't know this, but we were supposed to do this earlier, and I really do think the timing is so perfect. There's a lot of people in my community right now who really want to learn about ADHD, but not just ADHD, the intersection of ADHD with menopause or with being a woman, all these intersections. And so I love that you're here. We're going to get into some of that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So why don't we start by you telling me you identify as neurodivergent?
Yeah.
So a big part of this podcast is having mental health care and really other healthcare professionals come on, and we get to hear their expertise, but we also get to hear their humanity. And so is it cool to start with, your experience of neurodivergence?
Yes, definitely.
Sure.
Um, this kind of started for me in 2020. COVID brought a lot of challenges, but it also brought a lot of like self reflection and discovery. And my partner at the time was diagnosed with ADHD. And I realized while helping them explore this and learn more about ADHD myself, that a lot of things aligned with what I had had challenges with in my life. It looked different.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was doing the research, a lot of it was mostly talking about men and boys and how it affected them versus with women. And so I started to have conversations with folks, other therapists, other professionals about this, and started to kind of discover that I was also had ADHD and getting that diagnosis.
Yeah. So what led you to what was the tipping point where you're like, I'm going to get a diagnosis? Because it sounds like you were learning and you were resonating, and I imagine that was making you feel good or validated.
Yes.
What was the tipping point where you're like, I'm getting the diagnosis?
While in my life and in my career, I have always been fairly productive, able to stay organized, but only in certain ways in my life. And it was starting to get to a point where managing my work life and my personal life was really, really challenging. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
like, there has to be something I can do about this to help make this easier or do things differently. Because I was so burnt out, so tired all the time, and realizing too how much my emotional well-being was also affecting my physical well-being. And so
Yeah.
that was what really kind of pushed me to, like, I really need to do the work in figuring out what is actually going on.
Yeah, that makes so sense. That makes so much sense. And I feel like that's a really common story for women, right? Where it's like not until they hit some kind of like major milestone or a significant chapter in their life where it's like, all the coping skills and masking and everything that had been put into place, it's like
Yes.
it's a house of cards and it all just comes tumbling down. Is that sound
Yes.
right?
Yes, it wasn't too long after I finished grad school that I really started to recognize things. I had kept my masks up really high to be able to get
Yeah.
through undergrad and grad school. And once that finally fell away, that structure, routine, and consistency, I was really struggling to recreate that on my own and also find systems that worked
Mm.
well for me.
That's such an interesting point, because I think the dominant narrative is like, oh, if you're smart, if you got good grades, certainly if you made it through college and graduate school, you couldn't possibly have ADHD, right?
Right.
And I'd never thought about that. There was something about the structure of the academic systems that was actually really grounding and helpful for you.
Yes, very much so.
Say
Being able to
more.
have a syllabus and know exactly what was expected of me and what due dates were. Because no, I procrastinate and I have issues getting that motivation to get things started, but deadlines really help me. And knowing expectations really helps me kind of fall in those parameters. Even if I do push it to the last minute to do a paper, I at least kind of know and have that it built into a schedule to prepare for that. And so it was very interesting for that to kind of go away and then having to make a new routine in my work life, professional life, that everybody just kind of was like, okay, well, you figure this out on your own. Like you have this. And it's like, but I needed more. So that was really where I started to learn that I do like novelty. I do like the changing of interests and things, but also routine and structure is something that I do thrive in as well.
Yeah. How, so do you only identify as ADHD?
No, I think it was like about 2021 when I started to continue my research into neurodivergency that I found I was like, wait a second, there are some conflictions here with liking routine, but also wanting novelty,
Yeah.
and like other like things that kind of combat each other when it comes to I enjoy being busy and having lots of things to do, but also hard for me to slow down and rest and recuperate after like having gone out and done things socially or just like working a lot. And I realized, oh wait, there's even more to this than I expected. Again, I had to undo my own assumptions about what neurodivergency was and looked like because my own knowledge and understanding of it was what we had thought it was before, which was,
Yeah.
you know, people with higher needs who need extra supports and, you know, those types of things, not somebody like you mentioned who can go through college and do all of these things and have that success, but still also have these pieces there as challenges as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this part makes me extra glad that we're talking, because I feel like there's so much information about strict ADHD. And there's also now more and more information about autism. But
Yeah.
ADHD, that's for our listeners, that's the term that's most often used these days for people who are both an ADHD and autistic. We don't hear nearly as much about that. And so, yeah, that's a big part of what I hope we'll talk about today.
Yes.
Um, can you take our listeners through some of the ADHD symptoms that you identify with, and really how they show up for you?
Yeah, so distractibility is a big one for me. I can easily, when I'm trying to get things done, be pulled off into different directions. And they can be positive things like a hobby that I really care about or wanting to talk and chat with friends or engage in spaces, but it keeps me from being able to actually get done the things that I need to do. My brain loves the novelty, loves, like I say, shiny things. And so I can easily go on side quests, as I like to refer to it. I might want to start cleaning my kitchen, but I end up in my living room opening a box of mementos and trying on clothes I hadn't wore for years. And yeah, so that is some of the pieces that I notice that show up for me with ADHD, as well as like the fact that sometimes I can't do things. I fall into that paralysis state. Really also messes with like self-esteem and confidence because sometimes I can't do the things the way that I'd like to. And like I know that I'm capable, right? But
Yep.
having this inner dialogue within myself just makes me shut down. And so a lot of times that is the space that my brain will go into. Well, I just can't do it. I like to say I get so overwhelmed or stressed that I just like take a nap. Instead of actually trying to make progress on things just because I physically can't.
Totally. Yeah, so you just mentioned a couple of things that are often huge experiences of ADHD, the paralysis, as well as the constant narrative in your head. Neither of those things are actually DSM symptoms, but they are also typically foundational aspects of ADHD. Talk to me about the voice in your head and how you cope with that, because like mine's real strong lately.
I think it ebbs and flows for me. Sometimes I can quiet it enough to get things done it because I'm in a good space, whether that be physically and mentally. Maybe I've been taking good care of my physical health, so it seems to quiet a little bit. There's not as much for it to spiral with. Other times though, when there are stressors happening, which is natural in life, that's when the voice can get really loud and it will distract me from being able to get things done or be able to focus. As a therapist, it's really, really challenging to be able to shut my brain off and be
Yeah.
able to totally focus on a client and what they're showing up with, because sometimes I'm not in the best space. So I have noticed specifically for me when I'm getting close to burnout, when I have really pushed myself to my limits, that voice gets really loud. And so being able to quiet that is something it has taken many, many years and a lot of practice to be able to do. And the one environment that I have successfully been able to do that with is when conducting therapy. Other spaces, it runs rampant.
Yeah, right. And what does it sound like? Because for the longest, I just thought that everyone had the kind of inner dialogue that I had. And it wasn't until pretty recently where I learned that most people do not have the kind of inner dialogue that I do.
Yes.
What does it sound like for you?
Yeah, I also have recognized the same thing. My inner dialogue is just kind of commenting on the things that I am doing, judgments about the choices that I am making, questioning things that are happening around me, noticing patterns. And this is all happening in the background. I might be just having a conversation with like a clerk at the bank. And all of these things are happening. I'm taking in my environment of like noises and sounds and all of those things, even the textures of my clothes, sometimes I'm recognizing. So it's definitely a lot of different things kind of happening at one time.
And for you, does it also look like a million different rabbit holes where it's like, this literally just happened. I'm at the office and I'm like, oh, I need to go and print something out. And then I go there, but my hands feel sticky. So I wash my hands and then I notice we're out of paper towels. So I go and get paper towels. And then I'm like, I went in there to do something. What did I go in there? And it's like, it's gone. And then I remember and I go back and I'm distracted. But it's like, it's that rabbit hole. It's like, oh, that makes me think of this, which makes me think of this, which makes me think of this. And like,
Yep.
and then watch the races, you know?
Yes, I was taking down all my Christmas decorations over the weekend, and I need totes, right, to put the Christmas decorations away. But that led me to my attic where there are all sorts of things that need to be organized and dealt with. And so I'm like, oh, well, I need to move this from this box in order to have room for all of my Christmas decorations. And then I'm in a rabbit hole of organization and doing all like, wait, what did I even come up here for originally? I have pictures everywhere, all of the things. So yes, definitely a lot of rabbit holes, and it's hard to then redirect back to what I originally was starting with.
Totally, yeah. So this is more like, I feel like the shadow side of ADHD that doesn't get talked about as much, but again, is often a foundational experience for people with ADHD. Emotional regulation or dysregulation, often. Can you tell us a little bit about how that shows up for you and how you manage?
Yeah. So when I am particularly struggling with like regulation, it is hard for me to verbally communicate. I have so many words and so many things showing up in my mind. It's hard for me to slow that down to even be able to communicate what it is that I'm thinking and feeling. So I have really leaned on writing and or doing voice memos. Something about not talking to somebody but talking to my phone helps me kind of sift through all the many thoughts and feelings that I'm having, and then actually select the things that I can recognize is what's showing up for the moment. But as a kid, I used to be really, really overwhelmed with my emotions. I would have a lot of big feelings. My family, lovingly called me the princess or the drama queen because I would express myself very openly and would have very big emotions. And I didn't know how to regulate those things during that time. So it was all out outward expression. Now it's more internalized. Typically, most people around me won't know that I'm dysregulated unless I kind of have that shutdown where I'm like limiting my communication verbally. But I really lean heavily on writing and doing voice memos to like now help me in my adult space kind of process and move through things.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm curious what you think about this, because I know that lots of neurodivergent people often have like auditory processing stuff, right? Uh,
Hmm.
so it sounds like that's part of it, right?
Yep.
My understanding is that auditory processing, as well as a struggle with being verbal when overwhelmed, is actually more typical of an autistic experience. Is that true? Is there overlap?
I think there might be a little overlap. It does tend to fall into like the autism space, but having rapid thoughts also falls within ADHD. And so I think it's kind of a combination of both of those things for me. And the hyperverbalization sometimes can show up if I'm feeling like really anxious, but it's very rare that it ever shows up in that space. But I do think it's kind of a combination of both pieces showing up for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I've got a hair in my lip. It's driving me crazy. um, Speaking of autism, can you talk us through a little bit about how those traits, strengths, struggles show up for you? Because I think people feel like they know a lot more about ADHD, and there's a lot more misconceptions about autism. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
I will say all of the traits that I now recognize are autistic traits were very much downplayed in like my childhood and
Yeah.
around friends and family, because I always had a specific way of doing things. I always had certain sensory pieces that were really hard for me to deal with, whether that be clothes or textures of food or loud noises, but only certain loud noises, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't all of them together because sometimes I'd be sensory seeking. So concerts and music that I enjoy, I have no problem. But other noises can be really triggering and can really cause me to feel immediately overwhelmed. Um,
Mhm.
Specifically, as an example, even now as an adult, I'm very specific about how I want my food on my plate. And that was not something that I had realized kind of falls into that autistic space. It was
Yep.
always just something that my family again lovingly made jokes about of like I'm just so specific, or you have to be careful not to add certain things to my plate or I won't eat my food. So some of those pieces started coming up, as well as just my desire for routine and consistency.
Yeah.
So that was always something when I, again, in an education environment, I thrived and exceeded expectations, again, because I knew what to expect and I knew what to do.
Mhm.
Socially, things were always really hard for me. Even now as an adult, making and maintaining friendships. Although I love my friends and I enjoy our spaces together, it can be really hard for me to socialize. And like I then have to recharge after and like minimal social interaction. And that was not something that I had realized was also a part of autism. And that I would just be sensory overwhelmed. And so those specifically were some of the things that I recognized and could see in myself as a kid, but it was never something that was acknowledged or noticed. I talked a lot, but then I was also quiet and at the same
Mhm.
time. So I had these conflicting things.
Yeah.
So no one really drew attention to it. Nobody was like, oh, this is a problem because I kind of moved through things. I did make some friends, but I never had a lot of friends.
Right.
And so that, again, never setting off red flags for anybody, and like that to look more deeply into it.
Totally. And I think that's the main thing that people think about when we're considering autism, right? It's like, well, how are you socially? Certainly, if you look people in the eye and have friends, you cannot be autistic. And so what I'm hearing you say is the social stuff did not come necessarily easy, but you were able to figure it out to a certain extent.
Oh, yes.
So
Hmm.
that's one big thing. And then there were all these other things like the routine, did I hear some rigidity around
Yes.
routine, about how things should go, the sensory stuff. And we don't talk about that stuff nearly enough.
No. And I definitely have very black and white thinking. I've been watching so many videos, even now today on TikTok and on Instagram and all these spaces, like about what black and white thinking it actually is, and how sometimes we don't even notice we're doing black and white thinking. And I do that all the time. I'm one of those people that's like, well, I can't start this routine until this day, when all of these things, like starting at the beginning of the week, but you can start it any day. Wait, why does it have to be on Monday, right? But my brain naturally kind of puts itself in those boxes to just make things what feels like easier. But I definitely have black and white thinking. I also will say too, becoming a therapist, I started college at 18. It also trained me on how to move through social situations and to show up and hold eye contact. I was recorded and was judged essentially about how I would show up and be viewed on camera. That allowed for me to kind of manipulate myself into being what was socially acceptable and what would be deemed as okay. I did not realize that I wasn't good at holding eye contact until I went to college and was taught how to do that and sit with my uncomfortable feelings about it.
That's right. And so masking is such a huge part of this for ADHD, but I think even more so for autism.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much that women and girls and femmes and trans people and queer people, right? Like there's so much that we are conditioned very early on to internalize. And so, but we're also conditioned to conform and like get with the program. So we're like, okay, I can figure out how to do this. And for a lot of people, we can figure it out. And so just looking at someone's behavior is not enough to know anything,
No.
really.
Right. Yes. Unfortunately, as a woman, I have been taught to highly mask most of the time.
Yeah.
The idea of having to go to a family function excites me, but having to have a smile on my face to avoid people asking me if I am okay, or just those small things that I do daily, it really gets to be exhausting. And that isn't something that if I didn't share, nobody would ever know. That I can't wait to take like my mask off at the end of the day so that I can just be and not worry about being perceived, or if people are going to misunderstand that maybe I might be upset because I'm not smiling.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And that's another good one too, right? Just like the muted affect or the flatness.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one. I am always trying to catch myself to not ask my kiddos, "Are you okay? What's wrong?"
Right.
Because it's burdensome to constantly wonder, like, what am I putting out in the world that's making people think, that's it's so much deconstruction, right? That's what it is at the end of the day. It's so
Yes.
much
100%.
unlearning about how we're supposed to be. Totally. Okay. So then I'm curious so you've been on your diagnostic journey. You got the ADHD diagnosis in 2020, the autism diagnosis in 2021. Is that right?
Yes.
So what I've experienced and what I've also heard is that once we're diagnosed, it's this like weird identity shift
Yep.
where symptoms almost seem to get worse. So I'm curious if that happened for you, which is like, we can talk a lot about even why that happens, but I'm curious what life has been like since you've been diagnosed, you understand these things about yourself, and now you're moving around in the world a little differently. What's that been like?
Yeah, I feel like I had like my old glasses taken off and new ones put on. And so now I just see the world through this lens of neurodiversity that I
Yeah.
hadn't seen before. I never gave myself permission to wear my AirPods in the grocery store and listen to music, because sensory wise, the grocery store actually is overwhelming for me.
Oh,
I never really took the time to like sit and recognize what actually am I doing throughout my day that makes me feel uncomfortable, and how can I give myself more flexibility and accommodation with things? Just small things like having a different type of coat to wear when I go outside, and then being able to have something different to be able to wear when I'm in the car, right?
yeah.
Because I know that's going to make me feel more comfortable. just taking the time to slow down and look at what I'm doing. Am I just doing this because this is what I'm supposed to do? Or am I doing this because like this is actually what makes me comfortable? But the more that I open up my mind to doing things differently, learning more about neurodivergency, I start to notice just how autistic I am, or just how much my ADHD impacts me.
Yeah.
The things that I do throughout the day, the stimming that I do, living alone and having the freedom and flexibility to move through my home and do what I want to do is an incredible feeling and very freeing. To sing, to dance, to stem, do those small pieces. I'm doing it more and more, which for some people, like, I agree, it makes us feel like, oh, I feel like I'm even more, autistic than I was when I first started this journey. And that is true in
Yeah.
the sense that I am allowing it to be. I'm
Yeah.
allowing myself to express. But that also means that the challenges are also starting to surface too, right? Of like, okay, so making the decision about limiting maybe social interactions because I know that it's going to be draining. So that means that I have to say no to things. That means I have to put boundaries and limits into place so that I can protect my peace or recharge when I need to. That is a really hard thing to do when people around me aren't used to that being something that I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for you, though. I love everything you just said, but I do want to focus on stimming. I think, again, this is so misunderstood.
Yes.
I think people either don't know what stimming is, or they have this very stereotypical picture of a young white boy probably flapping his hands, right?
Yep.
Or like rocking in a corner when upset. And those things are stimming, but
Yes.
those are some of the more extreme ends of stimming. Can you talk about what stimming looks like for you?
Yes. So I enjoy singing. And so I frequently will
Love
sing
that.
things to communicate. So like if I'm talking out loud to myself, right, kind of like talking myself through the tasks I'm doing, I might actually start singing some of those things. I talk to my cats all the time. I will inevitably turn something into a song. That is something that my brain does as a way to like relax and calm myself,
Yeah.
even if I don't know why I am singing about it. It just
Mm-hmm.
is something that comes naturally. Making certain noises or sounds or even rhyming sometimes can also be a form of stimming that I participate in.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is something I'm discovering more of in my space by myself because I don't have to worry about others hearing or possibly judging what it is that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I do tend to fidget a lot with my hands, but like the fidget piece of this, I never really allowed myself to participate in this. I always gave that opportunity to my clients, and I have fidgets all over my house. So that way I can keep my hands moving and do things to keep myself busy. It helps me focus and concentrate more easily. And that is something that I never realized was something that I needed. Sometimes too, I even will do things like repetitive movements. I will pace around my house when talking on the phone.
Oh,
Helps me stay focused in the conversation.
yeah.
Yeah.
I cannot talk on the phone without the ability to like pace. Like there's just,
Yes.
I don't like it even then, but it helps at least. Yeah.
Yes. Even sometimes, like if I find a certain noise or sound it's to kind of, I don't like scratch and itch in my brain is the best way I know how to describe
Yeah.
it. I will continue to do those things or listen to those sounds or listen to specific music over and over again as a form of stimming.
You bet. That that one blew my mind when I found out that like listening to the same song over, like never getting sick of the same artist or the same
Yep.
song. Like I just had someone from college who I roomed with in my sorority house tell me that one of her, I get emotional thinking about this. She just messaged me to tell me that she had a memory of me gearing up to break up with my boyfriend and listening to Britney Spears Stronger like 24/7, not kidding, 4 days.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I felt embarrassed remembering that because I was like, oh my God, I probably drove people crazy. And what she said to me in that message is, I knew you were going somewhere because of your tenacity. And I was like, I do have tenacity. And I was also just really fucking stimming because I was so dysregulated.
Yes, 100%. Yes. I mean, I looked at my Apple, like, replay list for 2024. They were the same songs and the same artists, and it doesn't really change. It changes a tiny bit, but most of the time it stays the same.
Yeah.
And I listen to songs based on my mood, and I listen to the same things over and over again. Another thing too, I think that might show up is also like sensory wise. I have trouble with like a body temperature regulation. So
Mhm.
sometimes I will also have to like do certain things stimming wise or moving my body or movement to help me kind of also regulate those systems as well.
Yeah. I'm glad you bring that up. We're dealing with a lot of sleep issues in our home
Oh,
right now. And I started to wonder after I realized that long car rides like really stress me out. I don't actually ever have the experience of being stressed out, but my body, when I'm like
yes.
my like nerdy metrics, it's just like orange the whole time we're in the car. And I started to wonder if that's why sleep is hard, if that's why car rides are hard, because the combo, I'm combination type for ADHD and autistic. So that combination means that moving my body is just an essential part of me staying regulated. So if I'm not moving my body, it's almost like I'm automatically dysregulated to some degree. Talk to me a little bit, yeah, about sleep for you.
Yeah, sleep has always been hard.
Yeah.
If I would have let my natural sleep cycle like do what it wanted, I would be up at night and sleeping during the day. For some reason, my body actually sleeps better when it's light out. I don't know what exactly, like when that started to shift for me, but that was what started happening. And also, I find myself really needing at least 9 to 10 hours of sleep to be rested. Honestly, I probably could get more and probably would feel even better because it is so hard for me to wind down to be able to rest. And when I do, I don't want to come out of that space. So waking up after I've been in a restful sleep is really challenging. I don't like having like alarms or things. I prefer to wake up naturally, just because my body just does better. But I've always had insomnia. I've always had to take some sort of sleep aid or something to help me fall asleep and stay
Yeah.
asleep. I wouldn't say that I have trouble once I'm in asleep staying there, but if there is stress happening, if my body doesn't feel good, if there's literally anything out of sync,
Yeah.
it will become impossible for me to sleep.
Right. Sleep is almost one of the very first things to go. And I know that's true for a lot of people.
Yes.
And the prevalence, the severity of sleep disturbance for neurodivergent people is just, whew, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Every person I talk to has some sort of struggle with sleep.
Right. Right. Whether it's the insomnia, like can't fall asleep, or those restless in the middle of the night, like one of my kiddos, it's unbelievable how much they move. And I'm just like, this can't be restful. Like they seem like they're awake, the moving, the sitting up,
Yeah.
the talking, like, oh, yeah, it's wild. It's really wild.
Yeah. I will say though that having the ability to have a flexible schedule has changed my life. Before, when I would have to be up early and go to work or have a certain like structured routine, which feels great, but wouldn't allow for me to be able to get the sleep and rest that I needed to accommodate for the challenges that I have for sleep. I really struggled. I'm not a morning person. That just is not who I am. I definitely am a night owl. So having the flexibility has been amazing in me feeling like more rested and actually feeling happy with my job and like the way that things are.
Absolutely. I always say starting CCBH was like the absolute best thing I could have done for my personhood, having nothing to do with my career, just like me as a human. Because it's a lot of work, but I can move with my own
Yes.
momentum and flow, and like, yeah, I cannot believe I survived the corporate world, corporate mental health
Yeah.
as I did. It's really hard for folks who have to do that, who don't have the privilege and choice. So yeah, that's such a good point.
Mhm.
I'm aware that we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure that we're getting to the things that you feel like are most helpful or beneficial for our listeners to know, who are maybe early diagnosed, or like feel like so many people are in that space where they've heard a lot about this stuff and they're like, maybe, but I don't know. Like, what are a few things that you think are really helpful for people in that space of like, maybe, but I don't know? What do they need to know? What do they need to hear? What do they need to think about?
I think self-reflection is some of the best spaces to kind of start to go with first. Tapping into like what it was like to be a kid, what it was like to be a teenager, what were the experiences, how did you feel, right? Being able to look at it from this lens and kind of looking at some of the things that maybe you had to mask or the
Yeah.
expectations that were there. Because I do think we just kind of dismiss because others around us also dismiss these things. And so being able to just kind of go back and review, if you have pictures, if you have videos, if you have can hear stories from family members, like all of these things is
Mhm.
also really important because and naturally we don't keep all of these things in the front of our minds.
No.
And to look, we have to sometimes look at the past to be able to really figure out why we're in the space that we're in today. So I encourage journaling. I encourage talking about past experiences and
Yeah.
exploring those things to then maybe go into, because when you go into diagnosis, they're going to want to hear about those
Yeah.
experiences or the things that stood out. So you having a good understanding of yourself, you then can communicate that to others, which I think is incredibly powerful with anybody who is thinking they're neurodivergent or is neurodivergent, is being able to communicate like the trajectory of these experiences. And so I
Mhm.
think that is a great space to start because you're going to want to be able to
Right.
communicate yourself and to others those things.
That's such a good point. And I want to say, for anyone who feels intimidated by hearing that, because I'm like, I don't remember anything from childhood, but that's not true, you know? And I think when we put ourselves in that headspace and we really start to think about it, or we look at old notes, or we look at whatever old pictures, or we talk to family members, it starts, especially through this neurodivergent lens, it's like, oh, that's right. I was always told in math I had so many careless errors. And if I just slowed down and didn't make so many careless errors, I'd be
Mhm.
better at math. Oh, that's right. My parents bought me these beautiful little diamond earrings when I graduated from college, but they got the kind where it's basically like a vault to get them off,
Yep.
because they knew I'd lose them if because I lost fucking everything. So it like didn't take long once I really like went back and was like, what were my parents always saying to me? Oh, that's right. They'd always be like, wherever you got where you're driving to, please give us a call on the landline and let us know you made it safely. Did I ever do that? No. And I felt like shit about myself. My parents are worried about me. They want to hear from me. Why can't I ever remember to call them? Oh.
Yes. I went back. I have like tons of bins of mementos and things from my childhood, and I went back and found like old report cards, notes from teachers. Like reading these things, I was like, holy smokes! Like I really struggled in math for my whole childhood. I initially struggled with reading and comprehension that I had to be in tutoring. That was not something that I knew. I went through it and I remember experiencing it, but to be able to look at it now and understand, oh wait, these things all align with like neurodiversity and
Yeah.
the comments that my teachers were making, that I did not stop talking. They had to put me on the other side of the room from my best friend to just get me to be able to focus and concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that I would not have really looked back on with any sort of care. Now, with the lenses that I'm seeing things through, I can see the whole picture.
Uh-huh. I love that math and reading came up, because those are often, again, not things in the DSM criteria, but struggling in math and reading comprehension especially, right, are
Yep.
often early indicators because of the amount of sustained attention required, the amount of working memory required, especially for math. Yeah.
Yep. And I will say, even like looking back at education systems, right? Unfortunately, the way that the systems were when I was going through school, they just pushed you along. They
Yeah.
didn't actually take the time to make sure you understood content, to make sure that you mastered things. So I just continued to be pushed along, not really being able to learn and grow in the areas within math specifically that I really wish I could have,
Yeah.
because of the way the systems were. And
Mhm.
there was no notice, or hey, we should put her into tutoring for these things, because I was a pleasant student. I didn't like disrupt class. I didn't do these other things. So they just kind of moved me along.
Yeah, that's so great. Are you an attentive type or a combination?
Combination.
Combination, yeah. So I think again, the likelihood of a girl, woman, femme getting diagnosed as hyperactive type is just, it's so much less because we are so conditioned to
Yes.
be whatever that nursery sugar and spice and everything that, like,
Yep.
just keep it, tone it down. You're supposed to be nice. You're supposed to be agreeable. You're supposed to be pleasant. So yeah, that makes so much sense. So it comes out as some chattiness, but we're not going to see typically huge behavior problems
Nope. I
from
very
girls.
rarely did I get in trouble in school. It was mostly just for talking, like that social aspect of it. But I never got in any sort of trouble or acting out behaviors in school, because I also knew that that wasn't what people wanted me to be doing. And I unfortunately went to school in a pretty restricted environment. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And so the consequences were major. And so fear was utilized as a way to combat any of those other behaviors that probably would have naturally come out. But I never let them, because of the fear of those consequences.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah, right. Just like another. So there's like the gendered expectations.
Yep.
And then there are the additional academic expectations that were like prideful for you because of the environment. That makes sense.
Yes. hmm
What would you tell, as we're wrapping up, what would you tell someone who's like, okay, so I'm pretty sure I do, but like, do I need a diagnosis? What actually changes in my life? Like, what's the point? Like, I hear that a lot. Even as I would share my diagnostic story, people would be like, but I mean, like, what actually changes? Like, you're still the same person. I now know how to answer that question, but I really didn't when I got some of that pushback. So what would you say to folks?
Yeah, I feel as though the more that we learn about ourselves and the more acceptance that we can gain of where we're at, the things that are there for us, that allows for us to be able to see ourselves as a whole person,
Yeah.
and to be able to hold space for all of these things that we ignored, pushed down, or, masked. And that is something that you gain from getting a diagnosis. Even if you have a great conversation with your therapist and you really go through these things and you talk about, you think, yes, this is what's going on, there is so much benefit from having those types of conversations and opening up the space, opening up your mind and your perspective, that getting those diagnoses, having those conversations allows to happen. There is something strange in our brains, that will allow us to truly accept and be open unless we have things. I've heard from many people, friends, family, that like, but I can't really take myself seriously because I don't have a formal diagnosis. And I think that kind of encapsulates it a little bit, of that to have it doesn't, you're right, you are the same person, but it allows for that freedom. Unfortunately, that our society only can allow by like getting a diagnosis, and that validity that everything that you've experienced is true. You're not just making things up. There's something to be said about having somebody say that to you and hold that space for you as well.
Yes. I agree with so much of that. And if you have the ability to take yourself seriously and deeply understand and accept yourself without it, great.
Yes.
I also don't think that's super common, based on the people that I've talked to.
hmm No, I
Um,
I frequently have conversations with clients of mine who they still question, even though there is no question about their diagnosis, but because they haven't went and got a formal one yet, they still are worried. They still have well, what if I'm lying? What if I'm making all of
yeah.
this up?
To this day, I'm like, did I skew my autism results?
Yes.
Did I skew one of my kiddos' autism results because I knew the criteria, so I was able. It's like, no, this is just what's actually happening, and I communicated
Yes.
what actually is happening, and it's real because it's real.
Yes.
Ah, yeah. But I like the point that you made also, because I think, again, there seems to be like in the zeitgeist, this narrative that like you need a neuropsych evaluation in order to get a diagnosis, and that costs tons of money and tons of time and is like very inaccessible and really unpleasant. You and I have had conversations about that. But that's not the only way, right? Talk us through that a little.
Yeah, so there is a misconception that a neuropsych testing is the only way that you can get a diagnosis, but you can talk to your psychiatrist. You can get referrals to other professionals who also can give that diagnosis. And unfortunately, systems that be have created only certain tests that are supposed to be utilized to deem a diagnosis, but that isn't the only way that we can do these things. There are definitely ways that we can go and have conversations with people and still get that validation of this is what we have going on. And yes, it is very expensive to get neuropsych testing done, but and just accessing professionals in general can be a barrier all on its own. But other professionals are also able to diagnose this and can do similar things with you in order to be able to get the results and the feedback that is so helpful from that other more formalized testing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That feels so important for people to know. There's not just this one path. And maybe it's required because the school has said whatever, but it is not the only way.
No.
Yeah, there's other paths, other professionals. That's such a good point. If people want to work with you, learn more about you, where can they find you on these interwebs?
Yeah, so you can find me at the Sierra Center website. My profile is there. You can reach out to our team and they will happily help getting you connected with me. And I'm also on Instagram, Therapy by Lexus. I have some things posted there, not super active, but I do post things as I find them. So also welcome to follow me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lexus. It's always a joy to talk to you. Yeah, your humanity and your expertise are just very much appreciated. So thank you for being here.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.